This week, we welcome Mike Nichols, the head of product at Elastic Security, to talk about how Elastic Security is unifying SIEM and endpoint security. In our second segment, we welcome Ian Coldwater, the lead platform security engineer at Heroku, talk about Kubernetes and container security. In the security news, Iranian hackers are targeting Dutch universities, how electrical tape can fool Tesla sensors, a ransomware attack forces a 2-day shutdown of a natural gas pipeline, Ring rolls out mandatory even two-factor authentication, new privacy controls, 7 ways to improve the security of mobile banking apps, and a potential pardon offer that was made by President Trump, which I have to talk about this because it's so ridiculous. In any case, all that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. NetSparker, the developers of a comprehensive automated web security platform that includes web vulnerability scanning, assessment, and management. NetSparker's desktop and cloud-based security solutions employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities and provides a proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at securityweekly.com/NetSparker. The biggest problem in security that remains unsolved is flat networks inside the cloud and data center that allow threats to move laterally and compromise vulnerable targets. But microsegmentation using traditional firewalls is too complex and time-consuming. There's a better approach: Edgewise Zero Trust Auto Segmentation. Edgewise is impossibly simple microsegmentation. Using the identity of machines and software that are communicating, Edgewise offers the strongest protection that adapts automatically to changes. Protect any application in any cloud without any changes to your network by visiting securityweekly.com/Edgewise.
He's written earth-shattering video games in AWK. He's written porn on a TI calculator, and he interviews better than 5 out of 10 stoned-out hobos. Please welcome Paul Asadorian.
Well, welcome everyone to Paul Security Weekly. It's episode number 640, recorded on February 20th, 2020, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, where the doctor is in the house. Dr. Doug White, PhD, not medical doctor.
Not the kind that does anybody any good.
Well, you do good stuff for the
That's how my daughter introduced me at her like kindergarten, what your parents do day. The guy that went in front of me was like, save children with advanced surgical techniques. And my daughter got up and went, my father's a doctor too, but not the kind that does anybody any good. I was like, thank you. Nice to be here, yeah.
You make us laugh, and laughter is sometimes the best cure.
Medicine.
The best medicine. That's
when
right.
your guts are hanging out, laugh.
On the lines remotely, Mr. Jeff Mann is coming from a beautiful scenery in the background, Jeff.
Where am I?
Somewhere.
Yep, I am on my way out to San Francisco, laid over in Phoenix to visit family for the weekend.
Very nice.
And I get to be outside on their porch. It's a beautiful day. It's like 75 degrees. I get to have a cigar. I'm happy.
Nice. Very nice. Mr. Lee Neely from the land of potatoes, right? You're in Idaho, aren't you, currently?
Yes, I am, and the potato is what it's about up here. And just a recent headline that's apparently there's a group in Oregon and part of California that's trying to increase Idaho to contain most of Oregon.
And California.
Very interesting. Yeah. It's like weird. We'll see what happens.
Now, Tyler, you're also in Idaho, is that correct?
That's right.
Wow.
Not gonna claim anybody from Oregon or California or wherever they want to pull people from. Idaho's got enough.
Idaho has enough people and potatoes, apparently.
Idaho.
It's nice to have all of you with us this evening. Quick announcement. Join us at InfoSec World March 30th through April 1st. Disney's Contemporary Resort will be home to InfoSec World. Our listeners get 15% off the InfoSec World main conference or World Pass. You can visit securityweekly.com/ISW2020 to get your discount code. You can also, if you are a security vendor or you work for a security vendor and would like to do a sponsored interview with us at the conference, we can do that. Just go to the website, fill out the form, and we'll make that happen. Matt Alderman and I are hosting Container Security Day, which will be happening just prior to the conference, which I'm super excited about because most of my research this year has been about container security, which has been a lot of fun. I actually put some of my skills to good use recently, which so much so that our like production software is going to use some of my changes. I'm like, wow, my shit actually works. Like, get out. They're like, why are you so surprised by this? I'm just surprised my code actually works. Okay.
Yeah, it's like you got 5
Did you
GitHub
put some
downloads,
of your skills to use, or did you put your skills to some good use?
Just some, my maybe fantastic personal skills, maybe not so much. Maybe.
Well,
I don't know.
I don't know.
That's debatable.
All right.
All
Depends
of
on how
it's-
drunk
all
we
of it's
are.
highly debatable. Let's see. Mike Nichols is here with us. No stranger to the show. Somewhere in here, I probably have a fantastic bio. Oh, yeah. Mike leads product management at Elastic Security. He's the former vice president of product management at the company formerly known as Endgame. He managed the product management team, ensures the product team is constantly listening to customers, researching the market, and deriving differentiated technology. I read that as deriving caffeinated beverages or of some kind. You make sure the programmers have their fill of caffeine, which turns out goes back to the hackers in the late 60s. Used to drink a lot of Coke and not sleep and eat Chinese food. So, Mike, welcome to the program.
Hey guys, welcome back. Thanks for having me.
Yes, this is fun because you've been fully integrated into all things at Elastic, which is awesome.
We're doing it. Yeah, it's been about 5 months now. It's been quite an adventure to take our Endgame company, Endgame family, and merge ourselves into Elastic. They've been very welcoming, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it seems like from the start, it seemed like a really good kind of marrying of the two companies. But Mike, what's the journey been like? I don't think we've talked to someone from now Elastic, right, about the journey up to this point, because I think some folks that work for companies in technology, in security, are like, oh my God, like what happens if we get bought by another company or we go public, or like what's going to happen? And I think we tend to focus on the negative experiences that employees have had working for companies that have undergone some kind of major change. It seems to me, Mike, all things are good. Because we're still working with the same people like yourself, and which is one indication anyhow.
Yeah, it is a great point. I mean, I've been through negative ones of these before, and I think everybody has in security long enough, right? Companies are constantly moving, and Elastic's been great. I mean, they're one of the few companies I think that actually, everybody talks about culture. It becomes sort of a, throw it in quotes, and becomes one of those things people throw around. But it actually matters at Elastic. They put a lot of emphasis into caring about people and caring about the development, which is usually, when you're building a product, sometimes the developers are maybe thought of, they're put in a corner and just like, make it work, we're going to go sell it. Here, everybody's sort of elevated on the level playing field, both across sales, marketing, development. And they've just been great. I mean, I think the main thing that was exciting for us was an embracing of the distributed nature. So Elastic, everybody says distributed, but they mean like, hey, we have a headquarters, then we put like one person out here in Idaho, right? For them, it really means everybody's distributed. We have people in like, I think 40 different countries, all over the world. And so for me, like I just actually hired my first new product manager that I hired on my team since joining Elastic, and I got to hire somebody out in Ireland. So it's like, that never would have happened in Endgame because we were kind of DC based. We had an office in San Francisco. We wanted to keep people close, and now I can get the best talent that exists anywhere, right? We can find the best, kernel developer for Windows. Doesn't matter if they live anywhere in the world, we can bring them on board. Awesome.
Yeah, and I don't think many that haven't been working at these types of companies, right, smaller to larger, when you're a smaller company, it's really hard. I mean, there's basically a lot of paperwork to go through to hire people from first different states is one level of paperwork within the U.S. Right. Then you start stepping outside the U.S. I mean, there's a lot, and it's constantly changing, too, as all the rules and regulations and laws change. So that's one positive thing if, you're in this transition, or you may be thinking about undergoing this transition, is that at a larger company, it makes it easier to hire from other countries and really expand that talent pool, which, as we know, there's a shortage of engineering, specifically in security.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to find good people, and making them relocate to DC or San Francisco, usually isn't an option if they're kind of comfortable where they are. Right. So that's been great. And then on the product side, the positive piece is that, again, in the negative stories you hear, and ones that I've been through, they bring somebody in and they say, okay, we'll take this piece, we'll take that piece, and everybody else can go. They brought in our entire team, including G&A and other areas that aren't typically brought in an acquisition. They brought the whole team in. The whole leadership team is still intact. My CEO is now the general manager. My peer on the engineering side is our engineering lead. our CTO is the CTO type, what they call a tech lead. And we were fully embraced. We actually grew. We actually took the SIM team and joined them into our organization. So we're in now what they call Elastic Security, which is our former Endgame, which is the endpoint security piece. And then they had a SIM team that was building out the SIM product that we have. Mm-hmm. And now we've combined into one single kind of entity under Elastic Security. So we actually grew. We have, we get to put more great features and value out to customers. It's pretty awesome.
That's awesome. So what are some of the product enhancements that you can talk about today that have happened in the past 5 months?
Yeah, well, I think the main one we got instantly. It actually happened. We announced that we were going to do this acquisition back in June, and then we actually joined forces in October. There was some period of time we had to go through all the paperwork. So in the middle there was Black Hat, one of the big conferences for security, and we actually shipped a release to put some really tight integration into Elastic there, kind of prior to the joining of forces. And that was the first thing that our customers got as additional value, which is, what Elastic does really, really well, and they've done well forever, is obviously search. We were able to put, all of our endpoint telemetry data into a single place, and then have that be searchable instantly, right? In a way that, when I was an analyst, I was used to, I won't say the names, but using other products that maybe I'd queue the query up at night and come back the next day and then take a look at. And Elastic is it powers things like Wikipedia, right? So it knows how to make things happen quickly. So we were able to give our customers sort of instant, analysis, threat hunting kind of power over their data that they weren't used to right away. And so that was the first big sort of aha moment of like, oh, cool, we can do more now. We can actually look at cross endpoint threats. We can find lateral movement discovery and other things that we couldn't do just looking at one endpoint. And now we're able to take that even further and kind of look at I hate, again, these terms are like, everybody's talking about the platform idea of like, hey, if we put it all together in one single vertical stack, it'd be so much better for our users. And a lot of people have tried and some are not successful. But I think we have a great ability to get there just by the openness of Elastic. Like what we're doing is that our endpoint is, I think, really great, and we could talk about it. And it feeds into the Elastic SIM, but the Elastic by nature is open, right? Open source, open code. So the SIM also takes in everybody else's data. Like you can put our competitors' data in us, that's fine. Like I'll take it all day because we can solve that core problem for our users. And now that we have our protections team, which you've talked to before, you've talked to people like Mark Dufresne and Paul Ewing. They're all over now building detections for the SIM on top of sort of the standardized layer of normalization we call Elastic Common Schema. Now, so we can get. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Mike, so what I see you describing or hear you describing is that it goes back to my enchanting quadrants, right, of indicators of compromise. So you've got network, you've got endpoint, you've got SIM, and I draw one for threat intelligence, mostly because I needed 4. And I was short one, and I wanted
it's not a quadrant unless you got 4.
You need 4 for a quadrant. But I will defend that quadrant, right, as being a quadrant. But what I'm hearing you say is that once you've unified these technologies, or as you're unifying these technologies, it allows you to cover all of these quadrants in one solution, which I think is super important. It sounds like you can get that network data from anywhere, right? And integrated into the SIM. You can get that endpoint data. You could overlay threat intelligence, and this becomes the platform for you to do that level of analysis.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like, taking in anybody's data. We even have these things we call beats, which are these sort of free data gatherers, like data shippers. We have one called Packet Beat, which just gets network data off of any device you can install it on. So it's almost like a free IDS where you can go grab this information back. But that's exactly the point. Like we want to find a place to consolidate and centralize data, and then use the power of sort of the openness of Elastic, right? A completely open source kind of base platform in Elasticsearch with this open scheme of ECS. And then you've talked before, I think we talked about EQL, that event query language we built that is also open and actually right now being built directly into Elasticsearch as a sort of first class search language. And our hope is that we invest, we try to invest this way in Endgame, and we're somehow successful with the community. We partner with people like Red Canary and did some great work. But now, Elastic, and that's communities like what they do, right? They do 40 plus events around the world a year called Elasticons, and they're always in these kind of deep conversations with our users. We can now actually build a community around these rules that work on this open source data that could be, PCI, HIPAA, GDPR, IoT. You can do all these expansions with an actual really strong community using a technology that anybody can get access to. I think that's the difference. It isn't like, a community team building on a enterprise only software you got to pay a lot of money to get into. Like, this is a thing that's openly available. Our SIM is in our basic license, which means it's freely available for anybody to download and use today and start to build these rules across their data sources.
Mike, as you manage the product portfolio, one of the things that came about recently is kind of converging on two topics that I think have been very popular here on the network and with our audience, and that is, how do I get these quadrants and apply them to cloud, and how do I overlay MITRE ATT&CK framework, right? Because I think we've reached a point where most enterprises have some kind of presence in the cloud, whether that's basic infrastructure all the way up to serverless and everything in between. We've also got on-premise stuff still that we're managing and maintaining, and I need to collect the endpoint, the network, and the logs from both on-prem and from the cloud. And once I'm collecting all of that, now I need to overlay all this MITRE ATT&CK framework stuff on top of it. How do we do that with Elastic's platform?
So the first one on the data collection side, that's where we kind of lean back into these beats. We're constantly growing them. So just in the last release, we added CloudTrail and some Google Cloud Platform logs, and enhanced those to get more of that cloud data. I was excited to hear you guys talking earlier about Kubernetes. We GA'd Elastic and Kubernetes using a Kubernetes operator, but we're obviously looking to grow data into container gathering as well. And so we just there's a bunch of community beats as well. We have community teams that have written like Okta and Office 365 to get that data. And the idea is, how can we build this sort of very easily and expandable data collection across, like you mentioned, these data sources, so it gets in one place. But that's sort of not even, I don't know if it's even half the problem, right? The larger problem is then how do I analyze it? And so you talked about, like, we embrace MITRE ATT&CK, like that's sort of our key taxonomy we believe in. We just launched our first set of pre-built rules inside of the SIM in the last release, mapped to MITRE ATT&CK, and this is the same team and expanded with more people that was building it at Endgame. And our idea is, and I think you saw this before in our product, is that alerts you can do, and you should be alerting on challenges in MITRE ATT&CK, but MITRE is not, like, a lot of MITRE shouldn't be alerted on. Although if you look at the last MITRE public test with APT3, I think some vendors wrote alerts anyway to kind of game the system. We won't talk about that. But there's a bunch of the information just needs to be enriched, right? You just need to add the sort of tagging the telemetry so that you can go see that, this was a logon script was used, or run DL32 was executed, and then add that context in either a threat hunt or in an incident, right? You can get that additional context around it, and that's what we're focused on doing, is providing high fidelity alerts across any data using that ECS standardization, and also enriching all the data coming in, so you can have hopefully almost all of MITRE covered and enriched, but not alerted on, because that's how you do it.
Is MITRE generating rules or pulling rules, or is it the other way around? MITRE's being used to visualize data that's coming into Elastic, or both?
Yeah, we look at MITRE sort of as our kind of risk framework. Like, where do we have gaps in our telemetry and visibility? And our goal is to give our customers full visibility into basically anything that's covered in MITRE. Mm-hmm. So what we do is our team will look at sort of the MITRE matrix. They'll look at what's happening in the wild, and they'll say, I think we need to enhance this area, this release, or this time period. And they'll write rules that maps to a MITRE, and there could be dozens that map to one technique, right? Like PowerShell, for example, there could be a bunch of them in there. And then from a visualization standpoint, as you mentioned, we'll use, Kibana has these kind of ability to kind of display dashboards. We have some ones that show like the coverage of the MITRE matrix, but that's more for like the CXO, nice looking thing. It doesn't show depth, I don't think, as well as the like going in and actually looking at what these things are providing. Being able to actually get deep detail of, PowerShell, even if you're trying to bypass by using like a command lit or a script block. Like, how can we show that we have coverage of that, not just that you say, hey, command.
So MITRE would be the starting point, and then the rules are pulled out of the rule base based on things I've chosen in MITRE. Okay, I got it. That was
exactly, yeah.
Okay, I just want to
kind of organize around like, what do you have for execution? Well, here's our 95 rules on execution that all map to MITRE.
That's great. Exactly. Yeah. That's awesome.
And we do that just because I think it's important that we give our customers a good understanding of, like, one thing I try to be really clear with and honest with in customer conversations is we don't try to use like the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain we've seen used in a negative way by vendors, where you just take the execution block and you just check it big green and say, hey, we cover it because we have antivirus. Meanwhile, there's 45 ways to execute code on an endpoint, and you're covering one of them, right? We try to provide more clarity by giving our customers that sort of depth of detail from the MITRE matrix.
No, that's not. I mean, I've seen people using MITRE as a starting point for a conversation about what we need to do. So with a client, if you can sit down and use that and say, this is a really important area of this matrix for you. Maybe this is for somebody else, but this is a place for you. Then if you can generate a back-end rule set from that, part of MITRE, that would give you a really shortcut into getting that into operation production, because that's a real hard step, is going from, oh, here's a thing on MITRE that is bad and it affects us. How do we actually operationalize that so we can track for it? Because then you have to sit down and start saying, okay, let's start writing rules. Yeah, and that can be challenging.
But, I mean, before we get to MITRE ATT&CK, I think organizations need to have a good asset inventory. Right. I don't quite know what that means, which is why I hesitate. And Mike, maybe you can help us with some examples, maybe how people are using the combination of the endpoint technology with Elastic to be able to maybe perhaps play into something that gives you a more comprehensive asset inventory.
Yeah, I mean that's honestly one of the hardest things in an endpoint world is trying to first say like, well, what do you got? A lot of times they don't really know where a lot of their stuff is. So yeah, there's a couple different ways. From the endpoint, we could actually analyze things like the ARP table of endpoints you are installed on to see if there's connections that we don't know about. But the addition of Elastic's been awesome, because Elastic, this I mentioned Packet Beat earlier. Like we can take their Packet Beat, and install it on some span port somewhere, and actually start to collect data and find a bunch of systems there, and then information in the Elastic stack that we have no coverage over, right? That we're not installed on. And these beats give us an ability to install on things that we could never install on an endgame. Like we have a thing called Machine Beat, which is actually like installed on the IoT devices in manufacturing plants to get data out of that. So it gives us an ability to expand and get coverage on more systems than we could ever do with just a sort of the endpoint focused system that we had. But it's not there's no easy button, unfortunately. It's a really hard problem to solve.
No, but I like where we're going though, because what you're saying is that if we've got some visibility into an endpoint, obviously I've installed the agent on that endpoint, I know it exists, right? But I can look at its ARP table, see what it's connecting to, exactly. Right? Then I can go to the network, see what the network is seeing to see if there's hosts there I haven't recognized. What I also like to then go to is logs, as much as I like to sometimes poo-poo logs as a source. However, when we're talking about asset inventory, your logs could also contain IP addresses like, hey, I just received a failed login attempt or something from this other host. That gets in a log. Now I'm looking at endpoint, network, and logs collecting and going, yep, I'm missing about 10% of the picture.
And that's a starting point for zero trust and whitelisting and all those kind of things. But I had one quick question. Is it a beat like a heartbeat, or is it a beat like those red things they grow in Russia?
Yeah, great question. More like the first, more like the heartbeat. Yeah.
No, I know. I was just wondering how it was spelled. So.
BEAT, like a heartbeat. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it could be like a beat. Like this beats, manly beats.
We like our logos. We have an elk for the Elastic Stack. We'll make a little beat logo with a leaf coming out.
I'm telling you. I mean, it's a thought.
I mean, pair that with some goat cheese and
oh yeah,
it's amazing.
You're all set.
Tyler's shaking his head.
It's a beet salad.
So, I was wondering, you're working on trying to detect a reduced dwell time. How are you doing that without winding up with more false positives, without revealing any secret sauce?
Yeah, oh boy. I mean, that's the golden problem. I mean, I won't be like every vendor that says we don't have a false positive problem, right? I mean, everybody's going to have a false positive issue. Obviously, we do things to try to mitigate it, that comes from, the testing, the rolling out. One thing about Elastic that's amazing is we have just a massive population. So we have a lot of people we can get feedback on pretty quickly and adjust. And there's layers, there's layers of engines. So we only talked so far about sort of our rules logic on top of the events, which is what we call EQL. But there's other layers. There's sort of our kernel-based preventions, which have end detections, which I know it's a dirty word, ML, some other pieces there. And then we have anomaly and outlier detection at the stack level as well. It's looking at sort of, as you mentioned, the log data. It looks at any source of information to find challenges. And we try to correlate that and prioritize it in the SIM based on that. So we have this idea of sort of a high priority, sort of a signal amongst the noise. And so the idea would be that, you could feed in more things that might be noisy alerts, but you feed them into a central place and then add, risk-based information into that, whether it's some score based on what the host is doing at an endpoint level or the user is doing, and elevate that up. And again, it's not a perfect solution anywhere. We do our best. We try to mitigate. We try to push out constant whitelist updates for global problems and give users a really easy workflow to do specific whitelisting. For example, if they want to turn on a more of a MITRE focused detection that might be, it might look a lot like an admin, they can actually tailor that to ignore the admin type behavior. But yeah, it's a good question. It's not perfectly solved, but I think we're doing a good job at it, and it's something we're happy to talk to people about doing better.
Well, I think a lot of vendors make claims that they've got low false positives
Of course.
and low false negatives, right? But Mike, what you said I think was really important. It comes back to like when I test my own code. I test them on, like works on my machine, right? Mm-hmm. That's great. And other vendors, I think, in other products are tested and they go, well, it's really low false negative, false positives because the data set is still kind of small. What I heard you saying is we can collect that telemetry now from all of Elastic's customers, blend all that together, and you get down, when you have a larger data set, you can greatly reduce false positive and false negatives because you've got more scenarios to run through, more data to work with.
And that is where the ML starts to come in. I mean, that's what ML is for, is to actually evaluate these massive data sets and look for trends and patterns and try to say, okay, here's a heuristic. If you see this, it means this, and it should be an alert or not. I mean, that's the kind of golden
The not is important. The not's this is not very widely usage of this protocol, let's say, but I've got a large enough data set to say, no, that's the way it should work, right?
Yeah.
You guys are using ML to build those weighted scores across thousands of organizations, correct? And do those weighted anomalous detection, are those correlated across each one of those organizations and centralized? And if so, like how does that the sanitization of some of that data and like the correlation pieces begin?
That's a good question.
Yep. Yes, that's a good question. We're actually super careful about privacy, especially because of things like GDPR. We actually redact data at the actual endpoint level before we get any telemetry back. But we kind of have two layers of ML. So there's the ML we deliver on the endpoint, and in that we're building that off of those are focused on either Mac executables, Windows executables, or macros embedded inside of Office documents. And we have just this giant corpus that we're constantly collecting to kind of do that. And we build those ourselves in a supervised way. Then there's the ML that's actually part of the stack, which is actually an unsupervised model that will learn in a customer environment, but based on that customer's individual information. It doesn't do any broader global check because of that. We were very careful about privacy and about sharing information. So if you utilize the ML sort of builder inside of the Elastic Stack, we'll actually build that based on your information. It'll learn and use its own window of time to figure out what's an anomalous user or anomalous login activity, things like that.
Mike, do you also how do threat intelligence feeds play into either platform on the endpoint or when you are correlating all that at a central point with Elastic?
Yeah, I really like that your fourth quadrant is threat intel, because I've been trying to get threat intel to be thought of as more than signatures and more thought of as like indicators of attack, more broadly, adding context to attacks. So on the IOC side, we can ingest, pick an intel source, MISP, for example. You can just integrate MISP data directly into the platform. It will enrich at ingest time. You can then write rules against that or alert on it, all the stuff you'd expect. But then we also talk about the IOA, the indicator of attack data. So we mentioned how we're doing MITRE ATT&CK enrichment ourselves, but you can pick any other enrichment you want and sort of apply that. So we have people, maybe not classically thought of as a threat intel, but you can bring in any data source in our ingestibility in Elastic. Have that come in and enhance that data at the time it comes into the platform, and then use that in your rules. So, we actually do simple stuff, right? This is not, like bringing in the PTO schedule and using that PTO additional information in the event that comes in to then add an elevation of risk to prioritize. So you can kind of get a little bit outside
Tyler's nodding because he's like, the users I target in my pen test are usually on PTO because they're not seeing what's happening with their account or checking their email.
That's actually really useful, and
it is.
The physical security has employed these kind of things for a long time around like badges, around holidays, things like that, where login times, like the successful organizations that are using that anomalous detection and anomalous behavior risk matrix, those are the ones that become very difficult for an attacker to kind of plan for or work around, because as an attacker, I'm not going to know that you're flagging on PTO time, or I may not even know who has PTO time because I may not have access to that system. So being able to flag on that is an early indicator that as long as you're able to respond and react to that and you have the appropriate controls in place to do that part, then your time to detection and time to remediation comes way, way down. And that makes it very difficult for an attacker.
I find it interesting that it kind of goes back to one of the first stories around threat hunting in the Cuckoo's Egg. It was an accounting error. Now these are back in time-based, time-based, time-sharing systems, but the PTO example, Mike, is really kind of an extension of accounting data, really, right? Which I think is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, kind of the secret sauce of Elastic is that, we're just not a-holes. We have a very economical way to approach data collection. And so where other vendors, kind of don't have this information, it's usually not because of a technical challenge. It's because they price themselves out of the collect. How many people know a security practitioner who is like dropping data on the floor from just their endpoint because they can't store it all? And
because
Elastic was really, exactly. So many people have moved to Elastic as sort of their, central collection, their data lake, whatever word you want to call it, because it's just super economical. And, because we were built for search, you can actually make the data actionable. So now if you have the data, throw it in there and we can now apply that in the SIEM, to add to detection. So we have an ability in a lot of our customers to do detections that you wouldn't do in other places just because we have the information. The user's like, oh yeah, sure, I can store that. That's not a problem. Instead of, cracking open their budget for the next, 2-3 years to get, one extra event into a competitor's product.
Well, and it's also one of my concerns with the cloud usage as well. Like, do I really want to enable all these logs? Because then I have to pay the extra compute time to generate them. I got to pay maybe storage to store them, transfer them. All of those incur fees. Jeff,
I'm curious, what kind of support do you give to your customers in terms of sort of educating them on what to do with all this data? Because I could see a lot of companies just being overwhelmed by all the data that's possible and not really know what to do with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you can imagine, from where Elastic started, we have pretty phenomenal support. That was in the very beginning days of Elastic, we were in a bunch of open source code and we were, putting support on top of it before we moved into a solution space like we are now. And so we have a really world-class support team that helps users understand the best way to architect, best way to, scale. I mean, the things that people have scaled Elastic to do is sort of incredible. But then from a use case perspective, because we've moved into these solutions like security, we bring teams with us that actually help also on the use case perspective. So, we have these like online based training modules that kind of, how do I do almost like a red blue exercise in endpoints and SIEM. And then we of course partner with providers like MSSPs and MDRs if you actually want to hand a lot of that work off to somebody else. So we don't offer those services ourselves. We choose to partner. I think it's the best way for our customers is to offer optionality. There's a lot of different people we can utilize for that. We have a lot of really good partners in that space as well that will, if a customer's overwhelmed, they'll take some amount of it off their plate and do some of that detection response or just the MSSP work.
Mike, let's say I'm working in a relatively small security team, which, I mean, a lot of large enterprises actually have a pretty small security team. And I'm frustrated with whatever my defensive strategies are, and I want to move into Elastic, right? I want to deploy the endpoint agent. I want it to collect my logs. I want to use some beats to get network data, and maybe want to collect some data from the cloud. Like, what's my ramp up time? Like, what do I get? Kind of, I hate to use the term, but like out of the box, right? And like, how far does that get me without any heavy customization and in-depth knowledge of the platform?
Yeah, I mean, we like to think that you can get up and running pretty quickly with most environments, at least at a scale that would be pretty powerful. Especially if you're on the endpoint side, if you're looking for the sort of next gen AV replacement kind of conversation, that just out of the box works, right? That's our machine learning models we talked about earlier. We can turn those on. When you move into the advanced kind of protection layer, you look at the behaviors mapped to MITRE ATT&CK. You want to turn some of those into preventions because we have the ability to put those all in preventions on the endpoint as well. That might take a little more tuning and work, collaboration, because the bad guys are using living off the land techniques that look a lot like admins. So how do we properly tune that? But I think that the power of Elastic that I think is pretty cool is that we don't, you can right now go to elastic.co and actually download and start using the SIEM like right now. Like you can just go download it, use it. And it's not a freemium model where you run out of time and it turns off, or it's like you store too much data and it turns off. What we did is we actually layer our licenses by sort of feature set. So there's a set of features we think that at a certain layer would be considered more of a enterprise or commercial company features. And we'll, at that point engage for, turning those things on. But we want this is going to sound kind of corny, but I mean, at Endgame, our vision statement was to protect the world's data from attack. And the hard part was we couldn't get to the world, right? We were a smaller company and we were behind a paywall. At Elastic, we actually had the ability to solve that problem. We actually could give people that wouldn't classically be able to afford an EPP or EDR technology an ability to use it and try it and get some capability that's useful now. And then if they want to move into more commercial or enterprise feature sets, they could move up the chain and with us, grow with us, right?
So I can go to the website today. I can get the endpoint agent as well as the Elastic platform, or no?
Yeah, so you can get the SIM right now, the Elastic endpoints. So we're in this transition period right now. We're actually fast tracking to pull our endpoint technology out of our Endgame was built on top of Elastic, so it is an Elastic stack, but it's sort of a second stack next to your current stack.
Yeah.
And what we're doing right now is the team is building all the technology directly into Kibana and Elasticsearch. So stay tuned, and I'm sure I'll come back on when we'll have the endpoint and the endpoint technology built directly into the Elastic stack. That's a key goal for us.
So,
but we can engage. We're happy to get a call with somebody and get it going as well.
But the first step, right? I'm frustrated with my tools and detection times. I can go get Elastic, start playing with it and learning the platform, see how it integrates, and get to a certain point and be comfortable with it as I make that transition without having to talk to a sales department, without having to get a quote.
Exactly.
I'm assuming I can spin it up probably pretty easily in a VM or in the cloud or whatever, right?
Yeah, download it yourself. Use it in Kubernetes. We run in all the major cloud providers: GCP, Azure, AWS. You can pick your.
We just literally did that. I mean, at a lab, we had an intern, and we challenged the intern to develop a tool like that, and it was this particular tool.
It was Elastic, yeah.
Yeah, it was Elastic, and until he hit the point where he said, "I need more money."
Yeah.
Because I want to, we're running an awesome tool, and somebody said, "Well, how do you do this?" And he said, "Well, you need to give me more budget, and I'll add those feature sets in." But it was a great way to get started putting these kind of tools in an environment and seeing how they work, and they were very very pleased with that product because it was like that.
Awesome. And thanks. I mean, the cloud's a 14-day free trial, so you don't even have to install a server. You can literally just spin it up and try it out right now.
We just installed a server,
but you can install it as containers too.
Yeah. So we just went GA with our Kubernetes operator, so you can actually use Elastic on Kubernetes right now as well.
That's awesome. And you support Kubernetes from getting logs from it as well. Yeah.
Yep.
Now, are all the beats and the kind of log ingestion pieces from the endpoints, are those all still free, or are those kind of tiered as far as whether they're part of the community or part of one of the enterprise tiers? How does that structure work?
Yeah, all of our beats are what we call our basic license, which is the free tier. They're all included. You can get all those from the website as well, so you can start pulling in data from the network logs, or we have WinLog beat to get Windows data. There's tons of beats you can put out there. So yeah, it's all available to start rocking and rolling now.
That's awesome.
That is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was kind of it was coming from a classical product company for many years and many different companies. It was definitely an interesting thing to move into when the CEO Shai said, like, hey, we're going to eliminate endpoint pricing. We're just going to we fit all this into the existing pricing model that they do, which is sort of this idea of resource pricing. And so there is no per endpoint price. There's no per ingestion price. It's just like how many resources you need to run the thing. There you go. You get full capabilities. Everything that's in there, you get the capabilities of them, which is pretty awesome. And we've been finding, not to go too much on a tangent, but there's other solution areas like observability, which is uptime monitoring, things like that. And we were finding that a lot of times, especially with cryptojacking, we had customers in Endgame where they were finding out probably a little bit later than they wanted to that there was a problem on a server because the operations team wasn't talking to the security team. I know it's no surprise to anybody. And now again, you don't have to duplicate or triplicate data. It's all in one place. You just have a different team logging in, looking at uptime. But we can actually released in 7.6, the one that just came out, some application performance monitoring alerts looking for things like SQL injection, stuff like that. So now you can have a team that's actually looking at that observability data in a security context without having to buy a new product or duplicate the data somewhere or whatever other layers there are. So you start to get the idea of just having one big place to put your data that actually can technically look at it in an actionable amount of time, and then put different lenses on top for all the different users.
And one that you can afford to fit and fits in your budget.
Yeah, exactly.
I was just going to say the affordability is the big part, right? Like that was kind of I think everyone's apprehensive seeing Endgame go over to Elastic, but the marrying of that with like Helk and Red Elk and the big push from the security community to use Elastic, when we've seen that and seen the pricing structure that Elastic has used for so long, I think that free tier and that kind of open source model has got a lot of people shifting. I mean, a good portion of our clients are at the point where they can no longer afford to collect any more data, and they have to by either regulation or governance, whatever it might be. There's just no budget for that. So I think this is a huge win and a big push for both the community and for technology.
Is Shadow SIEM a thing?
Probably. Mike's frozen. Are you still there, Mike?
Uh-oh.
I think we lost Mike.
Thus endeth the interview.
Yeah,
Shadow SIEM is not a thing. I think you should definitely coin that, because I'm going to see a whole bunch of IT help desks or security people now having their own SIEM because they get to ingest all the data and it's affordable.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it just struck me it'd be great for not a research project or setting up something that was where you didn't have a huge budget or time. You could get rolling, and if you're trying to just demonstrate an ROI, being able to start at the free tier would really you'd go a long way. And then, of course, there's a guy who wants to do his own thing. I know nobody has Shadow anything in their company but mine, but that's why I came up with the term Shadow SIEM.
I like the idea of Shadow SIEM. I think it does exist. I can see, folks go,
I can tell you 100% exist. We have lots of places that have classic SIEMs, and then we talked about earlier, like people are dropping data, so a security person will just install Elastic and start saving the data that was being dropped until they can prove value. And I think that's the best part about an ability to kind of come in at a tier that is free, is that you don't have to be baked into the budget. You can just prove value out first and then get budget later, I
mean, the only concern you end up having is your network saturation, right? For local network and or endpoint resource utilization, for a lack of a better word. But from that standpoint, you guys are ingesting at a fairly high rate with a fairly low overhead from what I've seen.
And we used to do that with like Snort. Mm-hmm. It was the same problem. It was just like companies were afraid of this stuff because they saw it and they went, well, all we're going to do is spend all our time chasing these ghosts, and setting up that Shadow SIEM I didn't know the term, but setting up this Shadow SIEM so that, thanks, Lee, so that we could, put a person on it, or even in one case I had them put an intern on it. And I said, look, you don't have any money. You don't want to spend any money. Let's let this person just do some analysis, bring it back once a week, and it costs you almost nothing, and you can see how well it works. And they, it was a way to sell upper management on that. And using something like Elastic, which is so much cooler, of course, where you can actually see all that stuff in real time, you can actually see them kind of get it. I mean, I've watched people watch attacks run while Elastic was running on this big screen, and going, look at this, watch these attacks happen right here, and they were like, oh wow, I get it, and so they got more budget too.
Yeah, using the open source as the proving ground is definitely the way to go. It's awesome. Mike, any newer features that you'll be announcing at RSA, or newer things that you haven't mentioned thus far?
Yeah, I mean, we're showing some more we just kind of more tightly integrated to make the single pivot easier, things like that. But we're going to be highlighting a key thing we added on Endpoint is that, back to the data fidelity problem, we obviously living off the land is a big problem. MITRE is addressing that with their newest test. They're using APT29, which uses a lot of PowerShell obfuscation techniques. So we added some pretty cool technology that we're going to be talking about at RSA to let us get, PowerShell introspection that's a little bit, differently done than we can use AMSI, but also goes in front of AMSI as well, a little bit earlier in the stack to try to, get around some of the typical AMSI bypasses that exist. We did the same thing with WMI. And then I think the cool one that you would really dig is we just also, we blogged about it last year, but we just finally went GA with our common language runtime attack technique prevention. So the ability to find the .NET reflection attacks that have been used by guys like Sharpshooter and Cobalt Strike and others. We have a pretty cool technique that actually allows us to protect against that as well. So just deeper introspection into data is always a key theme for us. And then how that applies to attacks that are in the wild right now and showing that to customers and users.
I'm just looking at Tyler's face. Because separating some of that against legitimate code that's running is the challenge there, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the .NET one we blogged about, I think, early last year, and it took us a while we mentioned earlier, a lot of good feedback from users that were in our early kind of beta testing and telemetry to do exactly that. How do we find the signal to the noise, right? Make sure we get the right malicious .NET reflections and not a lot of the code that maybe is written, I won't say improperly, but maybe suspiciously.
So you guys are able to kind of flag on that based on like quality of code or heuristics around the way in which reflections being used to kind of weed out some of that false positive?
Yeah, exactly. So because we're in the kernel on Windows, we're actually able to grab some of the the load time, the DLLs of .NET, and actually do some inspection on that, some heuristics across it. It's pretty cool. In fact, if you want to do a deep dive, I can connect you to the guys that actually built it out. It's pretty powerful. The same guy that built that, the same team did the PowerShell piece as well, and it's pretty cool in the PowerShell part because it works all the way back to Windows 7. So even though Microsoft is supporting Windows 10 and plus, we went back to Windows 7 and found a way to kind of inspect and introspect like script blocks and commandlets and things like that are used to sometimes to kind of bypass technique detections across PowerShell.
That's interesting. That may provide a lot more value with the Windows 7 being kind of end of life and a lot of IoT devices or embedded systems that rely on some of those frameworks or that OS. That could provide a lot of value, and I could see where that, from an attacker side, that really kind of sucks, honestly, but that's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, there's still, there's a huge portion on Windows 7 still across the world, and it's going to be a lot like XP. People are going to be painful to get off of it, so we're going to keep supporting it and put a lot of work into adding layers of protection where we can that maybe that didn't make their backport from Windows 10.
Yeah, ICS is a great example of a lot of that. Obviously, you have all the real-time operating systems and PLCs and stuff to deal with at a different layer, but the ability to handle some of those older, like HMIs that are not going to get upgraded or are going to be with that particular industrial control until it's kind of end of life, which may be 30 years, that's going to be very important. We have almost zero visibility and zero tools to kind of handle those bits and pieces in there. So
yeah, I was thinking the same thing. The HMIs and historians are typically Windows-based systems, right? And they're stood up, right? And there's not something you can be like, oh yeah, you know what? We're just going to take that offline for a day or whatever, and put in a new system. These are the systems that people are using to monitor energy companies and industrial control systems, and not just monitor but take actions, right? So those systems have to be online in order to make an adjustment to prevent some kind of catastrophe.
And those are the systems you'll find sitting there in a closet somewhere that are like beyond the grave, and you're going, what the hell is this Windows NT? And they're like, oh yeah, that machine's been running for like 13 years and we can't reboot it, and it's just like
no one knows what it does anymore, but if we unplug it.
Jeff?
Well, it's this is also impactful to the PCI world because there's lots of point of sale systems out there, especially unattended systems, which are a little bit closer to an ICS. Think gas pumps at all the different gas stations and convenience stores that still, many times are running on older things like Windows 7. So explain to me again. I'm listening a little bit more closely now because I'm, the problem in the PCI world is the ability to be able to keep things current, keep things patched, and the conventional wisdom has always been if you have an unsupported operating system, nobody's putting out patches for it, therefore you need to get off of it. So tell me again what you're doing in terms of being able to extrapolate back to older systems.
So it depends on which protection technique you're talking about, but in this one in particular, with PowerShell, there was the anti-malware standard interface, I think, AMSI, which was used to kind of get PowerShell event data, put in the ETW for analysis, isn't backported beyond Windows 10. So we found a way. We actually go and hook a little bit earlier than what AMSI's calls or hooks are to get our own data, and that works on older versions of PowerShell than what's kind of classically supported, including sort of what's installed by default on Windows 7. So it gives us more visibility into that. But there's other, like we have credential protection that we actually was fixed in Windows 10, but was a big problem in Windows 7. Some privilege escalation techniques that we have coverage for on Windows 7, and of course all the other stuff, malware and ransomware protections, things like that to help on that system. But whenever we see a technique in the wild, we really try to look at what's the broadest way we can protect our users, and don't worry too much about the supported versus unsupported OS, because we in the what was Endgame and is now Endpoint Security or Elastic Security, we're installed in places that won't upgrade for a long time. Federal governments or other places that are just going to be on Windows 7 for unfortunately a very, very long time.
And those can be installed in monitoring mode, not necessarily blocking or protection mode, right?
Exactly.
So you're not interfering with the operations necessarily, but it's giving you visibility into those older systems to say, this has got, someone trying to install malware on it, as an example.
Yep.
Well, it's interesting because, Paul and I used to work at Tenable, and Tenable, we have to go back a few years ago. It was when Windows XP went out of support. Nessus would just simply say, "Oh, here's Windows XP, bad," and it would stop. It wouldn't look for anything else. So if you have the ability to actually look at a system and look at for some of the attacks or things, and do they impact the older operating system, that's something that you should use as a selling point, perhaps, in the PCI world.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent point. Yeah, and I think the other piece too that's new with Elastic is that on the systems we can install on, if we actually either a beat might install on it, or packet beat could inspect the network traffic at least, and we could use that in the SIEM to find detections there as well. So that is very common in like IoT, for example, where you're not going to install an endpoint in an IoT device, but a lot of the headers in IoT are plain text and have a lot of good information about what's happening. So you can actually use that in the SIEM and have some detections there as well. So we have a pretty broad coverage now that I think is pretty cool, that covers a lot of different areas that might not classically be supported by your sort of endpoint security companies.
And Mike, a question about the beat. Is that installed as like a small Windows executable, like an agent, or like how do I install?
Yeah, exactly. They're all Go processes, basically user mode Go processes that'll run on the different. And they've been compiled for everything. I think somebody even compiled it for ARM processors or something one time.
Wow.
Good for them.
I think I've got one of those somewhere. Sarge. Is Sarge ARM or
Debian,
is that RISC?
Debian Sarge was a really old version.
No, I
of
know.
Debian.
It was either RISC or ARM. It was
Probably
RISC.
ARM.
You think it was ARM?
Probably ARM.
I had a server that was running Debian Sarge.
Debian Sarge.
While
Yeah.
you guys are digressing, I have one more question for Mike. How well do you guys handle what a classification of what's known as a real-time operating system? Like what Windows used to call embedded systems or compact edition systems. Can you reach those as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. So on the classic endgame side, it would really be it depends on what's embedded. Sometimes the embedded piece is actually just a stripped down version of like Windows 10 embedded now, and some of those we will support. But the beats are actually pretty cool. I mentioned, I think a little bit earlier, there's like this idea of I think it's called machine beat, but there's these things that actually could go in some embedded systems that we've compiled before that collect that data, and then that data can be used at least in detect mode in the SIEM. So it's not a perfect answer for you, but a lot of times it depends on knowing a little bit more about the architecture, and then we could talk about whether we can do the preventative pieces or at least the detection pieces.
Well, if you've got small pieces of code, you can assuming you're not usually not writing the code on the same system that's running the code when you're developing for a real-time operating system or even a firmware, right? So you would cross-compile that code. If the beats are small modules, whether it's Go or C, it sounds like you could just compile those and include those in your firmware and or real-time operating system, Jeff, and that would then send back the telemetry.
I was just
all my
looking
research in embedded systems and IoT. To me, that's the best approach.
Well, yeah,
if you can deal with getting that shit compiled.
I was reading about the packet beat thing or something like that. I didn't remember that was what it called, but that's what it had to be. For IoT and ICS, because we have the same problem, was we have all these devices and these ICS devices and IoT devices. I can't modify the firmware. I mean, I want to, but I can't. So how do I track all those things with Elastic? And that was something I had just been reading about. So.
Disassemble and put back together depending on what it is.
But you can't. I mean, these clients won't do that. You go to a client that's running
it's a custom thing.
A nuclear plant. They can't do that because they have to go through a whole Nuclear Regulatory Commission review to make even the slightest change. So I was wanting a way to just monitor things, and I actually think that was pretty effective because I could see the behavior in a known system. So this wasn't like a open to the internet kind of system. It was a known system. We still want to look for threats. And being able to see that network traffic and things trying to communicate that are out of the ordinary.
But in the point of sale example that Jeff gave in ICS, what we were talking about too was a lot of times those embedded systems or IoT devices will report back to a Windows system.
Yep.
Maybe you don't want to put a full agent on there, like Mike is saying, right? You just get the small little packet beat or small little code that runs on the Windows system that can give you telemetry. Yeah.
It'd be kind of cool to see some of the vendors start to adopt like the Elastic format or Beat format as kind of part of the OS as a standardized logging, for lack of a better term there. But to be able to incorporate that into the kernel and have that built in.
IoT as well.
It's one of those things where it's like, security, the vendor space is kind of a black box, right? Like people are so scared to talk about their IP and everything is even about how they detect things. I think Elastic's, pretty unique in that our code is open, right? It's either open source or open code. You can go in and take a look at this stuff. And you as a user, like you mentioned, you can recompile it, you can adapt it, you can modify it. And I think that's what's really interesting, especially for people like yourselves that are experts in this space to make it fit your organization.
Yep. It's awesome. Well, Mike, thank you so much. I hope to see you out at RSA. If folks want to get we talked about the free version. Where do folks just go to elastic.co and get that?
Yeah, I think if you go to elastic.co/security, you'll go to our security page where it talks about endpoint and about SIEM, and then from there you can go either way. There's a path to download the SIEM right now, and then there's a enter your email if you want us to talk about endpoint currently as we're transitioning into the Elastic stack.
Outstanding, Mike. Thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'll see you next week in RSA.
Absolutely. Stay tuned. That concludes this segment. But coming up next, Ian Coldwater. Stay tuned.